Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and welcome to Overwatch Central. I kinda wanted to go over the news recently that we might be seeing some buffs, in inverted commas, to the heroes like Winston for sure, but also potentially to Moira, Symmetra and Zarya. I feel looking over other people talking about this that nobody's really explaining the topic very well, so a lot of people are getting confused on how these changes could have a big impact on all of the different heroes that I've just mentioned. First of all, let's talk about the clip in question. This came from IDDQD stream. He was streaming from the Blizzard headquarters, which I gotta say is providing a lot of content in itself because a lot of the developers like Jeff Kaplan and of course Jeff Goodman do like to pop on, show their face and just basically update the community on what they're working on and how it's all going. I think it's a really good idea that Blizzard have implemented there, so I'd like to see more info coming in that fashion. Also dev updates too, of course, on the forums and whatever. But this came from Jeff Goodman talking about Winston, how his weapon basically works, and how it's negatively impacted by armor. Just take a listen to this.
Winston's beam, Zarya, Symmetra, they are affected by armor, but they're affected based on their sort of pulse rate. And we're actually looking at maybe changing that a little bit so we can override that value to make it a value that's a little more sane. Like, for example, what's come up recently is we're looking at Winston's tick rate on his like gun. Like you can hear it if you think about playing him. It's like like the kind of speed.
You can kind of like hear it.
Yeah, and it feels kind of cool as a lightning gun from like a flavor perspective. Like, oh, this thing's like zapping people. You don't want to make it feel like it's really slow, like pulses. But at the same time, it actually pulsing faster does make it affected by armor more right now. So it's sort of, I don't love that those two things are married together. Like, oh, we want to make it feel good and feel faster, but like then it's like reduced by armor. So we're looking at maybe maybe next patch actually, I think, or soon, being able to change, at least be able to override that value and how much armor reduces those effects. So that's probably coming pretty soon. We made the changes.
So as most of you know, Winston's weapon works a little bit differently to say a rocket from Pharah or Soldier 76 or Junkrat throwing a mine at you. The damage is continuous, gradual, in small doses, but over the course of 1 second, Winston's main primary weapon, the Tesla cannon, does 60 damage per second. But it's not in a flat sum. It's not every second it goes 60, 60, 60. It doesn't work like that. It's gradual over the course of a full second. In fact, if you're getting technical, it does 3 damage every 0.05 seconds. A 20th of a second, Winston ticks 3 damage to his target. So you zap a target 20 times every second, each of them doing 3 damage. That's all well and good, up until you come across armor. The main thing that armor wants to do is to decrease your damage by half. If you have an ability doing 4 damage, against armor it would only do 2, but it does max out at reducing damage when a number that it would be halved by is more than 3. For example, if you have a rocket of Pharah, you hit a target with it, it does 80 damage. Armor wouldn't reduce the damage to 40 by halving it, that just makes armor far too strong. Instead, it will just take away 3 damage from the shot, meaning that Pharah's rocket would do 77 damage instead of 80. So those big hitting abilities are still just as good as before, but those abilities that fire in small doses such as Tracer's left click, which fires a lot but each of the shots do minimal damage, then armor is going to half every shot, meaning that you effectively half your damage output with them. So any abilities that fire in smaller doses do get shafted quite badly by armor, and this is definitely the case for Winston and all of the heroes that have those ticking continuous streams of damage. So going back to Winston's damage, it ticks for 3 damage every 0.05 seconds, 20 times in a second, and each of those 3 ticks is brought down to 1.5 because of how armor works. So instead it only does 1.5 damage every 20th of a second, bringing it to, at least in theory, 30 damage per second instead of 60, halving it against armor. If it was done in a quick shot like a Pharah rocket doing 80 DPS, that damage would only be brought down to 77. But this beam kind of damage by Winston, Zarya, Symmetra and Moira is still affected just as negatively as before. The issue is for Blizzard there is a really straightforward easy fix, but it affects how heroes like Winston would play. For example, instead of Winston's weapon doing 3 damage 20 times in a second, it could do 6 damage 10 times in a second, or even 30 damage every half a second. It'd all still add up to 60 DPS, so it wouldn't be a damage increase, but armor would affect it less. It'd have to be more than 6 damage 10 times in a second, because that's a damage threshold where armor becomes a lot weaker. But the problem with that is that you lose the satisfying element of playing Winston with this constant ticking damage. Instead, it'd be stuttering instead of one constant stream. Kind of like frames when playing a game, right? You have hundreds of frames playing in a continuous loop, so it means that the gameplay is streamlined, continuous, and moves along nicely, that you can't see any stutters. But if you reduce the frame rate in a game, you then start to see it stutter out and look awful. It'd kind of be the same for Winston's weapon in that regard, so that's why they're not increasing the damage as such every tick and reducing the amount of ticks in a second. So that's the kind of problem that Blizzard have been facing with quite some time. They want Winston's weapon to still feel good, however, armor is going to be a big problem if they don't change it. So Jeff Goodman goes over how they intend to fix it. Those particular changes won't be massive, but right now all channeled effects such as Zarya, Symmetra, Moira and Winston are reduced by a flat amount like any other source of damage. But the size of the damage packets is purely based on how fast they tick, even though the tuning of the weapons are done via a general DPS calculation. Winston's Tesla cannon was initially tuned way back to have a faster update rate because it felt a lot better to use it that way, however currently that also means he does a lot less damage to armor. So what do they plan to do? Well, Jeff Goodman says that they're getting some new tech which allows us to separate armor reduction amounts for those effects from their update rate. This doesn't mean we're going to just go through and buff all of these heroes and weapons necessarily, but we are going to go through them all and make sure we're happy with how much damage they are doing to armored targets. God of Legend asked, will this result in a net damage buff against non-armored targets enemies too? And Jeff Goodman says no, this only affects how much armor reduces these weapons. So it isn't technically a weapon damage buff for any of these heroes, but more how much better they will be against armor in those cases. So it does sound like these channeled effects might just bypass how armor works, but that might make the whole system much more complicated. I also like the theory, even though it's a little bit tinfoily, that this might have to do with new heroes in the game and how they interact with armor. Like others have highlighted, Blizzard don't tend to just invest in new technology unless completely necessary, so this in inverted commas new tech might be something to do with new heroes and how they interact, which would be quite cool. It's very much Jeff Goodman going out of his way otherwise to try and fix this problem, which has been a problem since the game came out, you know what I mean? So that theory has a little bit of substance to it, but not an awful lot. So in short, Winston has a bit of a problem as well as the other heroes when it comes to having these continuous streams of damage. Because each of these abilities does damage in incredibly small doses but at a much faster fire rate than any other ability in the game, it means that armor basically halves all of your damage. So these changes may mean that Winston, Zarya, Symmetra and Moira might be buffed against armored targets. So if Winston and Zarya especially get these changes, they may be incredibly strong. Symmetra as well, if these changes go through for her, might just become a complete tank buster with the damage that she can do. But that's where I wanted to leave it today. It's a long-winded discussion. I hope I did it justice by helping you work out exactly how it goes about. But if you do have any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Some of the maths might be wrong in this video, I'm not quite sure, but I did my best to try and break this down. To wrap this video up, I wanted to give a brief shout out to HyperX. They've been with us for quite some time. It's been an amazing ride. And I know that 2019 is going to be a big year for them. They've got the cloud mixers coming very soon, some new headphones, cloud earbuds, which I really want to get my hands on. But I really wanted to shout out the mechanical keyboard, the HyperX Alloy FPS RGB. Both myself and Miska have them. Really good for playing Overwatch, and as you can hear, not too loud. And you can check them out in the description below. Thanks for watching, take care, we'll see you next time.